Hey guys, my name is Joe, and today we're going to talk some microeconomics. Now, one of the first things you're going to learn in this class, and one of the most important things you're going to learn in this class, is the supply and the demand curves. Now, they're called curves, but for the purposes of this class, we typically deal with them in straight lines. And this is so important to understand because it's really the groundwork for this entire class. You see this chart, the supply and demand curve, everywhere in this class. It's on every test, and most of the new knowledge that you're going to get is something that's building off of this. So it's really important to have a good understanding of this, and if you want to do well in this class, you will. So as you can see, you've got your price on the y-axis and your quantity demanded on the x-axis, with an upward sloping supply curve and a downward sloping demand curve. Now that's still pretty intuitive, right? At a high price, suppliers are going to want to produce and supply and sell more of that product. As the price falls, their incentive goes away, they're not making as much money, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to supply less of it. The demand's the exact opposite. At a low price, consumers are eating it up. They're saying, gimme, 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 I want to buy. But as the price increases, they're saying, maybe I don't need that, and the demand falls. So a warning that I have for this, though, is that a lot of people think it is an individual thing, that the supply curve is how much one individual firm or one individual business wants to supply. And they think that the demand curve is something that one individual demands. But really, it's an aggregate. So these curves represent everybody in the market. It represents all the suppliers in the market and all of the demand in the market. Now, where these two curves meet, where they cross, is called the equilibrium. That's where the price means that the suppliers are supplying exactly as much as the demanders want to buy. And this is something that's important because it's what's thought to be best for society. The equilibrium is where everybody is benefiting the most. So if the price is above the equilibrium, then the quantity supplied is higher than the quantity demanded, and there's a surplus. So if say at a given price, the suppliers want to supply 14 million of one product, and the demanders want to buy 8 million. 14 minus 8, there's a $6 million product surplus. If the price is below the equilibrium, then you have a shortage. So you've got buyers who want to buy a lot of it and suppliers who don't want to supply a lot of it. So it's again the same concept. You take the difference between the two, and that's what your shortage is. Now, this is where the concept of the invisible hand comes in. The invisible hand is a concept that says that the self-interest of individuals is going to produce an equilibrium. It's going to drive the market forces into that equilibrium. Because if suppliers are sitting on a high price and they've got a lot of stuff sitting in inventory that they're not selling, they're going to say, hey, I could sell this if I lower the price, and that's better for me if I sell a lot of it. So eventually, the idea behind the invisible hand is that the markets will always work their way to an equilibrium. Now, when you're at equilibrium, and even when you're not at equilibrium, but it's easiest to see when you're at equilibrium, is you've got your consumer surplus and your producer surplus. Now, your consumer surplus is the difference between what the consumers are willing and able to pay for something and the price that they actually pay. So you'll be given a question that will ask what the consumer surplus is, and you just need to find the area of this triangle. So it's pretty simple, right? 1/2 times base times height. So it would be whatever quantity this is times whatever the difference between the price and this equilibrium price is. Everything in this area, it's a triangle. It's easy to find. That's how you find the area of a triangle. We've been doing this since we were little kids. Now the same is true for the producer. The producer surplus. The producer surplus is the difference between the price suppliers are willing and able to supply the goods compared to what they actually receive. So it's the same idea. You're just looking at this triangle instead. Now, again, this is something that you're going to see more of as you get deeper and deeper into this class, and you're going to get a better understanding of it. But for today, I just kind of wanted you to see where it is and what the producer surplus is, what consumer surplus is. Now, another important thing to know about these charts is how elastic they are. And what do I mean by elastic? What I mean by elastic is how steep is the curve? How do people respond to changes in the prices? So if something is elastic, it means that it's got a steep slope. So if you've got something that's elastic, a little bit of a change in the price is going to cause a drastic decrease in the amount demanded. So this is for goods that have plenty of substitutes, because if you've got something that can be substituted and they're charging more money, you're just going to say, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to deal with that other good. I don't need to deal with your product. If you're dealing with something that's perfectly elastic, it is just a horizontal line. Easy as it is. Examples of these would be cars and movie tickets, right? There are a lot of cars in the market, so if somebody's increasing the price of their car, you're going to demand less of it. The same is true for supply, just in the opposite manner. Now, when you've got inelastic, you have a flat slope, and a large increase in price is going to lead to minimal decrease in demand, or the same but opposite is true for supply. Now, this is true for stuff with few substitutes, and examples of that is like healthcare, right? My sister has diabetes, and if they increase the price of insulin, she's just shit out of luck. She's got to buy insulin. There's nothing she can do about it. Another example of that would be tobacco, right? People get addicted to tobacco. Now, some places like New York have tried to increase the price of tobacco by adding heavy taxes, but it hasn't really been effective in getting people to quit. It's just been more of a deterrent for people to start. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So what determines elasticity? As we've talked about a little bit, you've got your substitutes. If there are a lot of substitutes, you're going to be dealing with an elastic, something that's elastic. If there are a few substitutes, it's going to be more inelastic. Again, then we talked about whether it's a luxury or if it's a necessity. If it's a luxury, you've kind of got some leeway with what you want to buy. If it's a necessity like insulin or healthcare, doesn't matter what they're charging you, you're going to buy it. Now, how do you figure out if something is inelastic or elastic with a formula, right? That's how a lot of classes work, is with formulas. So right here, you can see these formulas. You've got your change in your quantity over your change in price. If that is greater than 1, then you have something that's elastic. If you have something that's less than 1, it's inelastic. And if it's exactly 1, it's called unitary. Now, to find the change in quantity, it's simple. Again, we've been doing a lot of this stuff since we were in elementary school. So it's quantity 1 minus quantity 2 over the average of the two quantities times 100. Change in price, same concept. So we've got a practice problem here that you can see. I'm not really going to be able to show you what I'm doing because of technological constraints, but it says, suppose the quantity of root beer demanded declines from 103 gallons per week to 97 gallons per week as a consequence of 10% increase in the price of root beer. So that would be 103 minus 97 over 103 plus 97 is 200 divided by 2, call that 100, right? So that's 6 over 100, 6%. With a 10% increase in price, so 6 over 10. 6 over 10 is 0.6. Your answer is going to be A. Pretty easy to follow along with that. Sorry if you can see that. So that's a pretty easy concept that we cover, but it's important to know, and it's important in how we understand these supply curves. Now, there are a couple types of goods that we deal with in this class. Now, we've got normal goods, inferior goods, complementary goods, and substitute goods. Normal goods, as your income increases, the demand increases. So an example of this would be a Rolex. You're making more money, you're going to buy something nice, good for you. An inferior good is as income increases, the demand decreases. So just to stay consistent here, that would be a fake Rolex. No CEO is going to the guy on the street looking for a fake Rolex, right? That's something that us broke college kids do because we want to look nice, but we don't want to pay for the brand name, right? So again, inferior good, as income increases, demand decreases. The opposite is true. As your income decreases, the demand for that's going to increase. So now we can talk about complementary and substitute goods. Complementary goods are two goods that are used together, and as the price of one complementary good increases, the demand for the other complementary good is going to decrease. Now, an example that is typically brought up for this class is hot dogs and their buns. So if the price of hot dogs is super high, you're probably not buying hot dogs, which means you're also not buying buns. So on the contrary, there are these things called substitute goods, and they're goods that can be used in place of one another. And as the price of one substitute good increases, the demand for the other complementary good also increases. So think about this as like a PlayStation and an Xbox. If Xbox were to all of a sudden start charging significantly more than PlayStation for their product, the demand for PlayStation is probably going to increase, right? Xbox isn't. I mean, some people argue, but it's really the same thing, right? There's no real distinguishable differences between the Xbox and the PlayStation in terms of quality. Bicker all you want, but they're pretty much the same thing. So if one of them gets super expensive, people are just going to start buying the other one. So now this is where the bulk of the questions of the supply and demand curve come in, right? It asks for shifts, and bear with me for a second because we're going to talk about what shifts the demand curve and what shifts the supply curve. So for your demand curve, you've got a couple of factors that will shift it. And it's either going to shift to the right if the demand is going to increase and to the left if the demand is going to decrease. So what causes a shift in the demand curve? You've got a change in income or wealth. So like we talked about earlier, you have more money, a lot of times the demand is going to go up. You have less money, the demand is going to go down. Change in preferences or tastes. So a lot of times in this class, what they'll do for preferences and tastes is they'll say a new study came out that says this product gives you cancer. So for that, that's going to change people's preferences. They're saying this thing gives me cancer. I don't want that as much. I'm gonna take less of it. So that's how this class deals with preferences and tastes. But it's pretty intuitive, right? If you like something more and that's what's in, you're going to demand more of it. When it goes out, you're going to supply or demand less of it. You've also got a change in the price of complementary and substitute goods. That's what we were talking about a second ago. And you've got your future price expectations. So if you expect something to be more expensive in the future, you're going to buy more of it today. So that trips people up because it's hard for them to wrap their head around the fact that the price is going to increase, but the demand is going to increase as well. But look at it in terms of an investment, right? So if you know for a fact that a stock is going to be worth 3 times what it is today, you're going to buy a lot of it today. So it's really not as hard as it should be for people to understand that, but some people have a little bit of difficulty wrapping their head around that. So those are the changes in the demand. I've got that listed here for you so you can see. So what causes a shift in the supply curve? There are a few things that do this as well. First, you've got your input prices. So that's just how much it costs them to supply these goods. So say you're making wooden benches. If the price of wood increases drastically, it's going to be harder for you to supply. The supply is going to decrease. And I should have said this before I started, but it's the same. So with the supply curve, you've got your upward. If it's decreasing, it's going to the left. If it's increasing, it's going to the right. Another thing that shifts the supply curve is technology. So again, we'll stick with the concept of wooden benches. If you're making wooden benches and all of a sudden a machine comes out that can build these benches for you and you don't need an assembly line or you don't need workers to do it, you can do it automated, you're going to be able to supply a lot more of it at a cheaper price. It's going to shift to the right. The number of sellers. So as there are more sellers in the market, the supply is going to increase. If there's less sellers, it's going to decrease. But you can also think of it as in terms of future expectations of the number of sellers. If somebody expects one market to become very saturated, they're saying in a couple of years there's not going to be a lot of room for people in this market, then some people today might want to supply less of it. They're saying, I don't want to touch that market today, which would decrease the supply in the market. You've got your future price expectations. So did I talk about that? Yeah, I talked about that in demand. So that's one of the ones that can increase the demand and the supply. So that's one that you have to be careful with when they ask you questions, because you have to know that. Another one that changes the supply curve is government policies. This is mainly with taxes and imports, and say they make something illegal. So if they add a tax to something, the supply is going to go to the left, right? It becomes more expensive for the suppliers to supply this product. So the questions about shifts typically tell you something that happens in the news or something that happens in the day, and it's one of those or multiple of something that's going to change the demand or the supply curve. And the easiest way to handle these questions is to just draw it out. Now, a lot of people don't like to draw it. They think they can do it in their head. I used to be that way as well. But I'm telling you, the easiest way is draw a simple, quick supply and demand curve, right? It takes 2 seconds for you to do it. So it's pretty easy when only one of the factors changes. So I've got a few examples that we'll do here, right? You'll probably be able to follow along with this with the printout, but I'll read them to you. So it says, new technology is developed for producing noodles. As a result, the equilibrium price of a pound of noodles blanks and the equilibrium quantity blanks, right? So you've got your supply and your demand. Technology is better, so you're going to increase the supply, right? People are going to supply more of it. And your new equilibrium quantity is higher and the price is lower. Pretty easy to see. You can see that black line is the new one. Bing, bang, boom, right? Number 21, more companies start to produce memory chips. As a result, the equilibrium price of a memory chip blank and the equilibrium quantity blank. So again, supply, demand, takes 2 seconds. A lot of people think they can do it in their head. It just avoids easy mistakes if you write it down. So you've got your supply, your demand. More people are starting to produce, supply is going to increase. What's happening to the price? The price is decreasing. What's happening to the quantity? The quantity is increasing. So these get difficult when they ask you about multiple shifts. When they say, for example, that the supply is going to increase and the demand is going to decrease. But what you have to do with this, and this is why it's so important to draw it out, is because you don't know the magnitude of the shifts. And in a lot of classes, teachers will give you a none of the above as an answer, but for the most part, it's a distractor. You're never going to be given a none of the above. For this class, it's not uncommon to see a none of the above or a we need more information. So what did I say? I said supply is going to increase and demand is going to decrease. So let's say it's a slight increase in supply and a large decrease in demand. So your quantity for this is decreasing and your price is decreasing. So now let's say it is a huge shift in supply and a very minimal shift in demand. And for this one, your quantity is increasing and your price is decreasing. So if they were to give you a question, and you can see that right there, right? So if they give you a question, a lot of times you really have to make sure that you're drawing it out and that you're drawing multiple charts because sometimes it's not clear. Sometimes it'll say the price is definitely going to go down, but we don't know about the quantity. So it's really important to understand that, and like I said, it's one of the most important things that you can do to draw it out and make sure that you've got that down and that you can see it and that you know that you're not making a silly mistake. Thank you guys for your time. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.